Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Bitcoin is a very polarizing subject, and when it comes to social media content, the vast majority tends to be either very pro-Bitcoin or very anti-Bitcoin. So that was my idea with this channel. I wanted to present a more rational take on Bitcoin. However, the rational take may upset some people. Basically, the foundation of my take is that Bitcoin is not an investment. It's actually a gamble. The game I've got playing in the background is Gentleman's Dispute. I've been quite enjoying it. It's a very good game. I would recommend it if you're into stupid games like this. With weird mechanics. But anyways, Bitcoin has been called many things. It's been called a store of value. It's been called digital gold, which is in that realm of a store of value. It's been called the future of money, a revolution of sorts. It's also been called an investment. Some people would consider when they're buying Bitcoin, they're calling it, I'm investing in Bitcoin. What would you define as an investment? So to me, my understanding in traditional finance, an investment has two things. It has cash flow. So it produces something. It produces rent or yield, some kind of earnings, maybe dividends. And it also has an intrinsic value. So it's tied to an underlying business or asset. Stocks have earnings. Real estate has rent and price appreciation as well. Bonds have interest. Bitcoin has none of those things. Bitcoin doesn't generate revenue, doesn't produce cash flow, it doesn't represent ownership of a business or ownership of anything besides Bitcoin. And its price only moves based on what someone else is willing to pay. And Bitcoin has it's a narrative-driven price. So Bitcoin's value, it's almost entirely based on belief. So the belief that others will adopt Bitcoin, that it'll become money to an extent, that Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation, similar to how a lot of people perceive gold, and to that extent, the belief that it's digital gold. And those aren't really, at least in the way we understand them, those aren't financial fundamentals. It's purely based on sentiment. And an argument could be made that Bitcoin's price movement is entirely based on the greater fool theory. So when an asset doesn't produce anything, it doesn't generate income, it doesn't represent ownership in a business, and the only way the price goes up is if more buyers step in later at higher prices. So the holders of Bitcoin keep buying it at higher and higher prices, and new people keep coming into this asset and keep buying more Bitcoin. So that kind of is by definition greater fool dynamics. But it doesn't mean everyone who buys Bitcoin is a fool, though. At least to me. Because while I think Bitcoin is a gamble, and I think it's a highly speculative asset, I don't think it's worthless, and I personally own some. I just allocate a very small amount of my portfolio to Bitcoin. But the basic hypothesis when you're buying Bitcoin is you're betting on mass adoption. You're betting on regulatory acceptance. You're betting that governments aren't going to start just outright banning Bitcoin. You're betting on Bitcoin surviving, so it doesn't, it stays solid. It doesn't get hacked in any sort of way, which it shouldn't. It has a good track record of not being hacked, but that is a very tiny risk. People say quantum computing, something like that, something of that nature starts just cracking people's private keys left and right, which seems very unlikely, like 0.0001% chance, whatever you want to call it, but things like that are possible. You're betting that the demand for Bitcoin is going to go up over time, and possibly that fiat currencies as we know them are going to collapse. So when people buy a Bitcoin, they're generally betting on one of these things or a combination of them, or they're just thinking, oh, number goes up, we're in the 4-year cycle, whatever, things like that. But these aren't, again, they're not predictable investment fundamentals. They're not based on earnings, anything like that. It's highly speculative, and like I said, I call it gambling. But again, it doesn't mean it's worthless. So just because Bitcoin's a gamble, it doesn't mean it's stupid. So there's intelligent gambles you can make all the time. You can bet on a startup and it goes 100x, whatever. High risk doesn't automatically mean bad. It just means you should treat it as what it is. It's a high risk bet with a lot of uncertainty. It's not a stable long-term investment. It's not something you go all in on. You don't pretend it's guaranteed and build your retirement on it, or something, irrational. Again, and this is not financial advice, as they say, but I definitely don't want to be overexposed to Bitcoin and buy into the hype and the delusion and just join the cult and just go 50% in Bitcoin or 80%, 100%. Like, I personally definitely would not do that, but Bitcoin could succeed, it could fail, but either way, at least right now, I don't think you can really call it an investment. It's a gamble, and it's one that you should only make with money you can afford to lose. So a lot of people say, oh, I allocate somewhere between 1 and 5%, maybe 10% tops, because it's a potential asymmetric return, where it's like, okay, I'm risking $1,000, but that $1,000 can turn into $50,000 or $100,000 within 20 years. Like, it's an asymmetric bet I'm making. Like, okay, that makes sense, but you need to understand the level of risk and how much that $1,000 can turn into. So that's all I'm saying. It's very risky, as people know, but there's a lot of creators out there just almost considering it guaranteed. They have so much conviction in Bitcoin. It's a bit frightening, honestly. It's like they just keep buying in, and it's like growing as a percent of their net worth, like 30% of their net worth, and then maybe later in the year it's like 60%, and Bitcoin drops and they just keep buying, and they potentially like take out debt to buy more. Like, it can get very, very, very dicey. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. If you want more rational, no BS Bitcoin content, hit the subscribe button. Peace.